Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Break the Rules live stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, and it is a great pleasure with you to be here with Will Chamberlain, Pascal Gobry, Bill Cole, Vladislav Davidson, JP Lindsley. We are going to be talking not just about Ukraine and about whether the United States has to turtle itself up during whatever's going on right now to fix a lot of the internal problems that Will talks so importantly about. But we're also going to be talking about Middle Eastern news, what's going on right now with this whole Saudi Arabian deal, what's going on with this Qatar plane, and it is a great pleasure for me to have such a diversity of people, as always, as Break the Rules does. Make sure to like, subscribe, smash that subscribe button, click the bell, all that good stuff. And for everybody who is listening right now in the X Spaces, make sure you click the YouTube link up above to go and see our handsome faces on YouTube. Anyway, we are going to be starting this off with Vlad Davidson. He is our Middle Eastern eye in the sky, as well as Ukrainian. Vlad, can you tell us exactly what's been going on? And then I cannot wait to go to our newcomer, Will Chamberlain, and Bill Cole as well. So, Vlad, go for it. You have the floor, buddy. And make sure, yeah,
Okay,
there we go.
and can you put me on in the space? Am I on the space, or do mic
You,
is off and I'm
yeah,
on this?
you're good. You're on the space. Everybody sees you on the space. Yeah.
Right. As long as no one else talks, there shouldn't be any feedback because I've got a computer and a phone. So I just arrived uh, from Venice and the Venice Biennial this morning in Paris, and the reason I say that is the Qataris are the first are the first major country in I think 55 years to have a major pavilion open up in the Giardini Pavilion. I think the first since the South Koreans in many decades, and at the same time, and this again, this is not just me bragging that I was in the Venice Pavilion yesterday. I was there because I'm a sponsor and contributor to the Ukrainian Architecture Pavilion, and I was there in my capacity as working on it. But while I was there working on the Ukrainian pavilion, obviously I took the opportunity to walk around the other pavilions, right, to see what other people were doing, what other countries had going. And let me just tell you, two things struck me. The Qataris rented two of the biggest palazzos in all of Venice, the Arts and Letters Museum. It was completely rented out by the Qataris. They had a lovely space in the middle of the Venice Biennial. So the point of that story is that the Qataris are spreading money around. And come inside. I'm actually staying with the great American artist Edward Mills, the dean of the Parsons Art School in Paris, and he's just walked
Mm.
in. Edward, come say hello to this prestigious and wonderful and brilliant panel.
Oh
Uh,
my goodness, look at that.
Look at this, the great American
This looks like a lot of important people. I'm here sweaty from the track.
Edward Mills, the dean of the Parsons Art School in Paris, my fellow American, great guy. I'm staying with him. So back to the Qataris. Just yesterday in Venice, an example of the Qataris throwing around hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. The Qataris, more than anybody else, have taken over elite consensus opinion in Washington, D.C., think tanks, newspapers, NGOs, organizations, all sorts of things. And it is utterly ridiculous that it took both the liberals and the conservatives until this over the top gift of a plane, which I'm sure the Qatari government didn't even think was going to cause any kind of recrimination or anything like that, to get to the fact that half of Washington, D.C. is taking Qatari cash, right? Every think tank that I can think of in Washington, D.C., and this includes the one that I have an association with or had an association with, it has a lot of Qatari money for various kinds of programs. Brookings Institution, Washington Post, not just the nice people in the Venice Biennial who were giving me the most amazing coffee that I had my entire life yesterday. All right, the Qataris are just a force for Borg-like diplomatic taking over of institutions that until recently no one has been talking about. So to me, this whole plane fiasco is kind of ridiculous. Why are people only talking about it now?
Yeah, I don't know, Will. Why are people only talking about it now?
Well, I mean, and now it's a way to go after Trump. But the Qatari money has been a problem for years. I mean, I have a friend, Mike Cernovich. He put out a movie on this all the way back, I think it's 2018, 2019, on Qatari blood money. I think it was entitled Blood Money. So this has been an issue. I mean, Brookings obviously was a primary target. But yeah, the Qataris are buying influence, and they're not shy about trying to buy everybody's influence. They're not just trying to focus on Republicans or Democrats. They want everybody happy with Qatar and not getting out of their way. And I mean, you understand why. It's a tiny little country. It's like 300,000 citizens, and then a bunch of, working, immigrants who are there basically as, servants, right on the edge of Saudi Arabia. If they don't have good relations with powerful hegemons, then Saudi Arabia would squish them like a bug. And you sense that the Saudis probably want to do that. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, so Qatar is drowning everybody in money, and I think it's having a bizarre and distorting effect on public discourse in a lot of ways. And I don't know exactly, obviously, we don't know exactly what they're spending money on, but I suspect they're doing social media games too, because why wouldn't they? I mean, if they're trying to spend all this money on PR via, think tanks and universities and politicians and you name it, why wouldn't they spend money on social media and trying to push the social media narratives they want? So I expect that's happening as well.
And they've been spending money on the allegedly the Gaza protests, as well as people like Alex Soros has been spending money on the Gaza protests. So what I want to focus on here, going back to Ukraine and Fortress America, a big concern of mine has been when people, let's say maybe like Mike Cernovich or people who are more MAGA adjacent, talk about how we need to take care of the very real problems that America's facing at the moment. But then when we have this very clear example of soft power, going through whatever barriers we could say, like the true MAGA patriots would have in theory have installed, that's very concerning, because we're used to talking about how, these evil Democrats, like they'd sell out their own daughter, but here we have an example of the United States infrastructure, under the control, patriots in control, under the control of MAGA, also being just as susceptible to this. And that's why the whole thing about, let Europe do whatever it's doing with Ukraine, doesn't really matter, it's not our problem. What concerns me there, like beyond Ukraine, is what exactly is going to happen when a China, which I would consider to be the de facto owner of Russia, when China has that much more control over a lot of Europe. And at that point, they would be able to instill way higher levels of soft power in a fortress America. That is my concern. I want to get to everybody, but since Will, you are new here, I would love to hear a follow-up from yourself about this before I get to the rest of the panel.
Well, I guess I make 2 points. I think the first big one is, if there's 3 great powers in the world, you want to be on the team of 2. And China is the major adversary. I think a general grand strategic theory would see bringing Russia over to the United States side is probably good for the United States in this effort. I don't think we want to be dealing with Russia and China together. That's why Nixon went to China in the first place, when Russia was the ascendant great power. So I think that sort of frames a lot of how many people in the administration think, that they actually do. They see the problem similarly, in that China is this big issue that we want to deal with, but their solution is radically different, meaning we want to peel Russia off from China. I think the second thing, and this is especially vis-a-vis Ukraine, and I think that a lot of the sort of centrist pro-Ukraine thinkers aren't really grappling with, is the way in which Ukraine really did kind of take partisan sides in the United States elections over the course of the last 8 to 10 years. Generally doing things that help the Democrats, sympathizing with the Democrats, finding them on the wrong side of, even during the impeachment.
Absolutely, and a Shonda, and I'm a huge Ukrainian nationalist, and our side has put all 90% of our chips on one side of the board. Not all of them, but too many. And it's that Donald Trump despises Ukraine is not entirely the fault of this presidential administration, but it's absolutely the case, and I've said this in print, that Ukraine's 3 presidential elections in a row been in involved and entangled. It's ridiculous.
Vlad, you have to unmute yourself when you're speaking on Spaces as well. Don't forget
Gotcha,
about the unmuting.
gotcha. I just wanted to say Mr. Chamberlain is exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess so that I think plays a role in, you know, how does the MAGA movement look at Ukraine, and also why we might look at other countries that, like Israel, for example, differently, where we don't see that problem where the government's not, you know, antagonistic towards the American right. And so then that compounds by things like Zelensky not showing up to the White House in a suit. Like, there's a broader sense, and I feel this way about a lot of European countries, that they say they're allies of America, but really they're allies of the Democratic Party, and that they would happily see the Republican Party go away. And it's like, if that's the way you see us, it's like, fine, okay, but now our dealings are very transactional, right? Like, we may think it's ultimately in our interest that Ukraine not get subsumed by Russia, but we're not doing anything out of love, right? And so that explains things like, we expect you to pay, you know, you're going to sign a very unfair minerals deal now because it's not Biden in charge anymore, it's us, and you try to get us out of power. So I think that, you know, in general, I think, and also we're going to, you know, if Europe can't defend itself from things like the Houthis, or you know, there's any number of issues where we're kind of tired of our European fake friends who are antagonistic towards the Republican Party, which is, frankly, it's the most powerful political institution in the United States of America, is the Republican Party. So I think all of Europe needs to get their heads around that, and major European nations, and that, like, oh, no, just those Republicans, those gross, no, we're the most powerful force in this country, and you rely on us. So time to make nice.
Well, let's go to JP and then Bill for the follow-up there. So JP, go for it. And unmute yourself as well on Spaces. Make sure to unmute yourself on Spaces.
I hope you guys can hear me clearly. Hello from Lviv, Ukraine. And as some of you know, I've been here, sort of got stuck here in the pandemic, but I've been here reporting every single day since February 24th, 2022. And, you know, I mean, I'm someone who rejected the American military-industrial complex. I was protege to the chairman of Fox News. I quit that job. I worked for the Weekly Standard when I first started my career, and I rejected the warmongering and got the hell out of there. And then I found myself here in Ukraine, here in the wartime, and I've reported on WGN radio out of Chicago for the first 3 years, and I continue to report here now. And Will, I'll say for one, I agree with you. Absolutely, most European leaders, also a lot of people in the government in Kyiv, functionally act like Kamala Harris is president, which is absurd. One of the people that doesn't do that is Sir Keir Starmer. I think he's actually been very brilliant on behalf of his country, and I think we've seen that relationship grow with President Trump. But when it comes to Ukraine, the first thing, and one reason why I've continued to report from here is because, as an American who values freedom and who appreciates a lot of what the Trump administration is doing, I see that that's why the people in Ukraine have taken up arms to defend themselves. And Ukrainians are different from the government. This is an important distinction to make. But that, if you come here on the ground, you'll know there's plenty of frustration here with the elites in Kyiv. They still have respect, but there's plenty of frustration. And it's been a very difficult thing since Trump's inauguration, especially since that meeting in the Oval Office, to differentiate, the people who actually will fight are fighting in the trenches and resisting Russia's attempt to take over the country, to differentiate that with what's happening in Kyiv. But I will say that, I think, Zelensky's team for 3 years, the first few days and weeks, which I know well because I was here, everything was a mess. And it was only the civil society that kept Ukraine alive. The government was not prepared for this at all. And it was the equivalent of the Cajun Navy here in Europe. It was Ukrainian people who banded together and said, we're not gonna let this takeover happen. And so it's very important. That narrative gets missed. I think in a lot of the hero worship of Zelensky, which has its place, especially in 2022 in the international media, but that really missed the story of the Ukrainian people, who they themselves are the ones who refuse to quit. And that's one reason why I spent a lot of my time reporting in Kharkiv, Ukraine, which is up until 2022 was a Russian-speaking city. It's 30 miles from Russia, and it gets bombed all the time. Often the missiles hit before the air raid alarms can sound, and that is the most defiant place in Ukraine. That's the place where people don't want to give up, the closer they are to Russia. that story doesn't get told. And so I'm kind of a voice kind of crying out in the wilderness here, not on the side of the Euro elites. Actually, here is someone that believes in freedom and that believes that, okay, firstly, I would say, whatever you think, whatever you want to decide about what the U.S. should do about Ukraine, let's at least be accurate about what Ukraine is. And in fact, this is one of the most conservative, freedom-loving, religious nations in Europe. When J.D. Vance gave that speech in Munich a few months ago, every value that he was rightly decrying was lost in Europe. I see on display here. And if you doubt that, I think you could say, well, the fact that people are willing to fight for these values here shows that there is something here. So as we carry on with the conversation, I'll try to, I'm happy to take any questions and to give my perspective here. But I think, firstly, Ukraine is actually this sort of faith, family, freedom-loving nation that we all want, that we all aspire to. And that's been missed. The New York Times doesn't tell you that story. And then secondly, as we look toward the threats we face with China and everything else, Ukrainians are, because they have the largest military in Europe. I would say they're the most innovative and battle experienced military in the free world. We can learn a lot from Ukraine. And I know this even from knowing some people in the White House. They're not paying close enough attention to what's happening with drone warfare. For example, look in the Black Sea with drones. Ukraine does not have a navy. Now, that's their irresponsibility for these past 10 years. But in the past 3 years, without a navy, they have destroyed a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet. They've been able to open up the trade lanes again in the Black Sea. And in the past 2 weeks, they're taking out Russian jets with their drones. And so at the very least, I think that we should pay attention to this. But I completely understand. I mean, again, as someone who, I once worked for Bill Kristol, and if I had never been to Ukraine, I would oppose Ukraine, because I would say after Iraq and Afghanistan, how can we trust Washington at all on anything? And if I think within the Trump White House, their view of Ukraine is a Ukraine that is a vision created by Joe Biden. And Joe Biden continually prevented Ukraine from winning, continually. And I think all Zelensky has to do is to tell Trump, hey, Joe Biden heard us. And he's afraid of doing that because he's got too many Democratic voices around him. We can go into the inside baseball on that, in the course of this conversation, because I have been talking to a lot of people with that information. But Joe Biden restricted Ukraine. And by the way, Joe Biden's son from 2014 was making money from pro-Moscow interests. Hunter Biden never came to Ukraine. He went to Moscow when he was working for Burisma. And once you begin to go into that picture, you see that it was the Democrats who, while they waved the flag and pretended they were helping Ukraine, were actually helping the military-industrial complex by prolonging this war. The past 2 years were the most profitable years ever for sales of foreign weapons. And so the defense industry does not have an incentive for Ukraine to win. They have an incentive for this war to go on for a long time. And that's the same incentive as Vladimir Putin. So that's kind of my thesis, and I'll pass it on to you guys.
Before going to Bill, hold on, Vlad. Before going to Bill, one quick thing. When it comes to the question that Will brought up, which I think is a very important one, of whether America can excise China away, or excise Russia away from China. This is something we were talking with Vish Burra before. And Vish said that you need to convince us being, the MAGA people, that this is a fool's errand. Because no matter what, and I understand, JP, everything that you were talking about, it's all very important, but if we do assume that there's a lot more, let's say, postmodern and Machiavellian people that at the end of the day are in charge of things in the world, that those are the decisions that are being made not based on any moral thing or anything like that, but purely on, realpolitik, as it is called, then we have to ask, how much do we trust that Russia would be able to go away from China? And we have to take a look at what's going on the ground, the territory that China currently owns within Russia, if we're talking about like a lot of the Siberian land, the relationship that both of them have, the psychological aspect as well, as far as what Putin sees in somebody like Xi Jinping. All these things have to be considered before we can say, well, obviously, if we make a good case for Russia, obviously they're going to take it because they're reasonable people. Because like I always say, like, Americans see reasonability in a lot of the people that they look at, because I think a lot of Americans are good-natured. and they want to assume that, well, of course we could just make a deal and it's not a problem, but then all this other stuff starts creeping up, I think. So I don't know. Before Bill, JP, is there anything you would want to say as far as the China-Russia relationship? And who knows, like maybe Will's right. Maybe there is a way that the United States can draw Russia away from China's influence, but I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I mean, I would say, I mean, and this is, obviously I have a bias on this because I've been through so many missile attacks by Russia. I've seen places destroyed by the Russians. I've been through many harrowing nights of Russian attacks. I don't see how anyone like that could ever be a partner of the United States. And what I see, sadly, and this is what I saw that the Biden administration squandered. Here you have, Europe is weak, but the part of Europe that's not weak is Ukraine, where they're actually willing to fight for everything that we believe as Americans. And by the way, you come to Ukraine and they love Americans, even on bad weeks when, the media, and maybe Trump seems negative about Ukraine. They love Americans here. And you see Teslas everywhere, by the way, and no one's burning them. And, this is the nation that if they actually visited, and that's why I try to encourage people, it takes some courage, but go visit Kharkiv, 30 miles from Russia, and you see, like, they could surrender and it would be a lot easier because they wouldn't have to live through this hell, but they'd rather have their freedom. And this is an insane idea, I think in 2025 for so many people that you actually would believe in freedom that much. But it is actually a real value here, as is Christianity. I mean, come to Lviv, and on the Sunday in Lviv, I think it's the most religious city in Europe. The churches are packed, and this is all what Russia will destroy. The Greek Catholics, by the way, in Lviv, they're part of the Roman Catholic Church. Whenever the Russians occupy territory, they make Greek Catholicism illegal. So this is actually what's happening. And Ukrainians are the ones standing up against this threat. So I would say, can we examine, can Russia actually be a reliable partner? Just look at the cities they've absolutely leveled. And then on the other side of it, look at Ukraine as a strategic partner, saying, again, the drone innovation, all the lessons we can learn about warfare, Ukrainians are doing it, and they're not asking Americans to fight. I see the arrogance of American defense companies that come here. They come here with their drones, including ones that pretend to be innovative, and the drones fail. They invariably. There's maybe one or two smaller companies who are not household names who've been able to do well here, but typically, because the key is that the innovation has to happen every day. The soldiers use a drone, and the Russians adapt. And you got to make changes within 24 hours. The American system and the Pentagon is not set up for that at all. We are woefully unprepared. And Ukraine, at the very least, could serve as sort of the bellwether of that and to help us be well informed. And so I think that's the best argument I can make for now. Is at least these are people who share our values, and in a way that Russia doesn't. So the idea that we can somehow pull Russia away from China. I don't know. I mean, I would say it's a better gamble to side with people who actually believe in the values that MAGA believes in. And this is the problem: is that the New York Times and all these reporters who I know here, they're never going to share that part of the Ukraine story. And Joe Biden did so much damage here. For example, even to this level. When the hurricanes were hitting southeastern United States, including my home state, North Carolina, like you will, in September, that's when Joe Biden chose to release an additional $8 billion in funding. But the stupid media didn't tell the story right. They made it sound like it was new funding. No, that was the money that the Republicans in Congress approved in April. And Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe, didn't send it in April. He delayed it, and almost like he wanted to help Russia, he purposely, he released the money the same weekend that Americans are getting battered by the hurricanes. And on top of that, it's not even real, that was not even real money. It's a valuation of old equipment that American purchased, that America paid for decades ago. And so I think what Biden actually supremely hurt Ukraine, not only in 2014, when he was in charge of foreign policy and European policy for Obama, but especially since 2022, every chance he got, he throttled Ukraine, and he made Americans tired of what's happening here.
Before I move on to Bill Cole, Will, was this story that JP just said right now about the hurricane, where it did not have anything to do with the money for Ukraine, Is this news for you, or was this something that you were already aware of?
I mean, I'm not familiar with like the timing and remembering back to there. I mean, I guess that makes sense, right? Like that Biden just sat on some aid, and I'm sure that the Zelensky admin and the Ukrainians have plenty of beef with Biden over slow walking, because he the way the Biden administration operated was just to make sure that wars weren't winnable by anybody. That was their default. They thought that their method of foreign policy was like, we just freeze conflicts as they are, and nobody ever wins. Then that's the right way to run the world.
By a team of lawyers. And
right.
No one wins, but some people profit. But some people profit.
Right. That's Israel to me, right? Like Biden just was like, we'll give you just enough to but we won't let you actually win the war and help these people get out of all their tents that they've been staying in for 2 years anyway.
And the Hunter Biden thing as well with Burisma, is that news
I didn't know that about that it was pro-Russia. I mean, it's like all I know is Ukrainian oil and gas company, right? And that's another one of those things that leads to this fundamental skepticism. We know that the Democrats have been just intimately involved, and they're children with Ukrainian interests. We don't know exactly what the nature of those interests are and what faction they are, because I'm not some Ukrainian domestic politics expert or anything. Just it's enough to make you be like, okay, right, skeptical.
Will, if I could interject on that, because that's one, and it's been so hard to report on that. So especially when Biden was in power, the media did not want to. You couldn't criticize Biden at all, and so there was a lot of filters on that. Maybe that's why I got canceled on WGN radio in Chicago. But now among MAGA people, the narrative of Burisma being Ukrainian is so ingrained that it's almost like an article of faith. But Burisma, the CEO, was a member of the Yanukovych government that was in charge of Ukraine, that the Ukrainians kicked out in 2014. Its CEO was while he was CEO of Burisma, was a member of the cabinet. He fled the country in the revolution, and he went to Moscow. 2 weeks after the revolution was successful here, from Moscow, in Moscow, Burisma's CEO met with Devin Archer, Hunter Biden's business partner. And Devin Archer is kind of a dummy. Like, he said this in congressional testimony in 2023, and he's like, oh, wow, I never really thought about it. I was meeting with Burisma's CEO the day that Putin took Crimea, and we were in Moscow. And so Burisma had an incentive to get control back of Ukraine. And what do? They start paying a huge amount of money to the son of the United States vice president, who was in charge of Obama's Ukraine policy. And Biden did nothing to help. And so, the Burisma has been so, it's been used as a bludgeon by the Russians to blame Ukraine. And but I think as part of this, if we dig deeper, we see a larger effort of the Democrats willingly using Ukraine, whether they want to impeach Trump, as they did in 2019 over that phone call with Zelensky. Which, by the way, 2 days before that phone call between Trump and Zelensky, the Washington Post had a front page, top of the fold story about Joe Biden's corrupt dealings in Ukraine and Russia. So it was totally natural and appropriate for Trump to bring that up. No one talks about that fact at all. 2 days before, the Washington Post had that story. But even then, the Washington Post was calling Burisma Russian, when in fact it was part of the corrupt regime that Ukrainian people kicked out of their country. So
anyway, I'll just say one thing, which is that what JP's story suggests to me very strongly that like Zelensky should have just resigned in February and given the Ukrainians a chance to have a fresh start with new leadership and reset their relationship with the United States. That basically everything you're saying about like actually there is this very reasonable kind of Republican MAGA friendly story to tell about Ukraine. Well, then Zelensky clearly was not the guy to be telling that story, given all these problems, and especially once the White House meeting happened and the relationship blew up. So anyway, that's my point.
This is actually a good point to go to Bill Cole for. Bill, I don't know, would that have worked? Logistically, would it have worked as far as the way that the government would have functioned? And then, just like I was asking JP, I would love to find out from you whether you think that Russia could be excised away from China, whether that could work. But one thing at a time. So, Bill, let me know what you think about whether they should have kicked Zelensky out, even for the sake of optics, just for the sake of America, being able to have a fresh start with some, maybe Zelensky or somebody like that.
Yeah, absolutely not. Ukraine would have collapsed if that had happened. So absolutely not. I'll just be real quick on that. But I'll get back to it, Will. Don't worry. Look, I'm not here for clicks. I'm not here for eyeballs. I could care less, right? I'm here to try and figure out what I've been trying to figure out for the past 2 years, which is get Ukraine in a position where they can end this war in a just way, and it's tied back to America, right? So this is great that we're doing he said, she said, talking about Hunter Biden and Qatar planes. But honestly, I think the Qatar plane is a nothing burger, one more nothing burger to poke at Donald Trump, right? And trust me, a couple years ago, I was probably the biggest poker of Donald Trump, but no longer, right? And I'll explain that. So look, I'm Virginia born. I've been around a long time, man. So I've got conservative roots, conservative blood, a NASCAR country, not Northern Virginia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been in software sales my whole life. I woke up February of 22. I thought, oh man, Ukraine's going to fall in 3 days, and that sucks, right? I was pleasantly surprised that Ukraine stood firm, and looks like there was a lot of civilian activity in February, March, and then the military sort of took over. And look where you are now. They pushed back in a mighty way, right? But things changed about 8 months in. I met someone who, let's just say, they educated me and said, hey, educate yourself further. So I took a step back and I looked at what was going on in Washington. I could see what was happening. We had a Democratic president. We had a Democratic Senate. I could see the sympathy play. And that's what it was. It was a huge sympathy play. There wasn't any empathy there, in my opinion. And so you had a diaspora, and you had Ukrainians from Ukraine trying their best to work with the left, work with Biden, trying to figure out a way to unlock funds, unlock weapons, do whatever they could. But I could see this was clearly a sympathy play, right? I knew that wasn't going to work. That's not going to work long term. Americans pay about as much attention to sympathy for about a week, right? And then they move on, right? So I said to myself in the conversations with my friend, I'm like, well, I probably need to get my butt over there. So that's what I did. And I've been many, many times in the past 2.5 years. What did I do? Build an empathetic disposition. Went all the way to the front many times. I've been to Kharkiv, been to Lviv, been to Kyiv, been to Kramatorsk, done videos all over the country, driven by myself all over the country. Right?
Oh, we lose?
Yeah. Did you lose? How can I get this story? Yeah, we're good. Yeah. How can I get this story back to Washington, right? So spending time in Ukraine was eye-opening. I created that empathetic disposition that Joe Lindsley's been living with for 3.5 years, right? There's no better voice, by the way, for Ukraine than Joe Lindsley. No better voice. So then the second phase is get yourself to Washington, Bill. Get yourself to Washington. Build relationships with Congress and the White House. Figure out how to put your empathetic position and your conservative position, how to get that voice out there for Ukraine. Because I could tell, man, all the way up to Zelensky, they were struggling with how do you communicate with Washington, and now they're really struggling. How do you communicate with a Republican-led, four-headed monster, right? We got the Supreme Court, Senate, House, and the White House. So April 2024 was the first real big opportunity to try and guide and steer. And we're talking 7 months removed from aid sort of being cut off in fall of 23. And if you were to look around the room and you were to ask anyone there in April 24, who's to blame? 100%. Oh, the Republicans. The Republicans are to blame that we're sitting here right now. They're to blame. And I took a different position. I stepped back and I said, well, what are the Republicans asking for? They're asking for something simple. Give us a plan. Give us a budget. Give us a timeline. Tell us how you're going to end this. If you go look at the bills, guys, all the supplemental bills say a lot of things, but they say one thing, which was just shocking to me. We will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. I said out loud as I could get, why the hell would a U.S. government put that kind of language in a bill? What does that mean? 100 years, 1,000 years? Because if you're the average American citizen, let's say you're MAGA, you want an end game. Because at the end of the day, you're like, there's money coming out of my pocket. I'll lean right into Will. There's money coming out of my pocket. All I want is for you to explain to me, where is it going? Is it going to be held accountable? And then what's the end game? Because of course We want to end Russia. Let's don't even go there. Thinking America is going to lean into Russia. No, not going to happen. Right? So April 2024, I was incredibly proud to have significant conversations with people like Mike Johnson, people like Lindsey Graham, and they unlocked 60 billion for Ukraine, most of which went to weapons, right? If they had a plan, if they had a timeline, that could have been 300 billion, because they would have known if we do this, we're going to get to the end of the war, right? So let's keep fast forwarding, right? So that was good for Ukraine. That sort of solidified, okay, this presidency and this Congress is lined up with Ukraine. Let's keep moving forward, right? Well, then we come to the election. I was probably as nervous as anyone else. If President Trump becomes President Trump again, what's he going to do about Ukraine? During the campaign, it looked like, yeah, we're not going to deal with Ukraine because there were some personal things going on there, clearly, right? Well, I've seen that left side on pro Ukraine. I've seen, clearly the left side completely attack the president as soon as he was elected, all the way up to today, finding anything they can to poke at him. And so my question to pro-Ukrainians, especially here in America, is what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to accomplish by attacking the president? What are you trying to accomplish by attacking Republicans in Congress? Because guess what? I'll go back to, I'm a sales guy. They're your customer. They're your customer. You want to get to a point where Ukraine is completely free? Support your customer. Understand how to talk to your customers. So when I saw that interaction between Zelensky and Trump and JD Vance and Mr. Brian Glenn, nice question, Brian. What an ass. Okay. So when I saw that interaction, I had unbelievable, heartfelt feelings for President Zelensky and his team. I probably used the word ambush, but then I stepped back, and I said, you know what? This is going to be a test. This is going to be a test for the strength of Zelensky and the strength of Ukraine, right? Can they bounce back from this ugly thing in this relationship? And I have to say, from there forward, look how far we've come. If we go back a couple of weeks to that 15-minute face-to-face between Donald Trump and Zelensky, we're off to the races, in my opinion. We are off to the races. And so what did I do about it? After the inauguration, I said, you know what? Ukraine needs a strong voice coming from that empathy position and coming from a conservative position. So I started a think tank. I started PTSI, Peace Through Strength Institute. And I said, I'm going to go into Congress, and I'm going to go into the White House as far as I can get. And I'm going to start communicating what we need to do as a country to get Ukraine into a position where they can defeat Russia. I don't want to get into lines where we are today, what that might be. Well, let's at least start leaning into a plan. You guys want a plan? Let's put one together, right?
Sorry to interrupt you, Bill.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we keep everything more in line with the Machiavellian aspect. I cannot stress enough how much that means, because while in the beginning you sort of dismissed this question about, well, why would America ever, work together with Russia? Let's take all the morals and burn them right now. No morals. The morals are all gone. They're all dead. It's all postmodern now.
Okay.
With that said, why wouldn't Russia work with the United States against China if there's some kind of a deal in place? And why wouldn't it have worked for Zelensky to, be dropped off in favor of somebody else? So let's take the China-Russia thing first. Why wouldn't that work? Because, Will, as you were saying before, you are seeing the globe as one that having three powers duke it out, especially if it's Russia and China together, it's far worse of an outcome, in your opinion, than having, China separated from Russia and Russia being closer to the United States. Sort of like balances everything out. But in Bill's view, that is completely impossible. I want to know why.
So let's all agree with this, though. Let's all agree with this, and maybe you won't agree. The United States, the people, the Congress, and the White House, we do not want to see Russia partner up with China. We all agree with that? We do not want to see Russia partner up with China, right? Okay.
Bipartisan. No one wants that.
Yeah, absolutely. So okay. So how do we deaccelerate? How do we deaccelerate that coupling that's happening between Putin and Jinping, right? Because they were together in the Kremlin last week, right? You had Chinese troops, North Korean troops marching in the Kremlin last week, right? So so we agreed. So from Trump, President Trump, all the way down, cabinet, Congress, the people, we want to figure out a way to decouple that relationship. Well, the best way and the easiest way and the fastest way is weaken the hell out of Russia. Weaken the hell out of Russia. We have opportunity in Ukraine to weaken the hell out of Russia. Right now this is a drone war, as JP pointed out. 80% of kills are by drones, right? So small investment into that category, give them a little aviation too, a little air defense. Boom. We get over parity. We get over parity with Russia at the front. And you're going from 5-1 kill to 10-1 kill to 12-1 kill to 15-1 kill. Not only are you weakening them, you are putting them into the deathbed. Okay, into the deathbed. And then the second thing is sanction the hell out of them and go to the secondary level. Go to the secondary level, which means 500% tariffs. We love that word, right? We love that word, tariffs. 500% tariffs on any country that's going to purchase Russian oil or gas. So that's what you do. You weaken the hell out of Russia through Ukraine. And then two things are going to happen. One, you're going to decouple that potential partnership between Russia and China. And by the way, China's going to get weakened too because they're learning a lot from Russia through this war, right? Let's weaken that. And then lo and behold, we might actually get Ukraine back to 1991 lines. If we do that, why would we want to toss out Zelensky, right? So if we do that, two people are going to get the Nobel Peace Prize, Donald Trump and President Zelensky. That's what I say about how do we deal with Russia? Let's go after them right now. We have the ability to go after them right now through Ukraine.
Well, let's say, for example, the case is that the people who are in charge, and I'm not saying this is, but hypothetically, have been so enamored and charmed by Russia. Maybe they befriended the Red Scare girls, Anna and Dasha, and went to all the film festivals, and all of a sudden, now their mind is thinking like, this romantic, Pushkin-esque Russian society, whatever. Let's say that they're dead set on that. Why is that impossible? Why is it impossible for Russia to say bye-bye to China, to team up with the United States, and maybe to usher in some beautiful new future where they're not going to be as dictatorial, they're not going to be as mean?
Let's just name names. Come on, man. Let's just name names. You really think there's someone on that administration that has the wherewithal, has the morality, and has the power to steer the American public in the direction of Russia? I want to know who that is. And above the noise, above the T-shirts, above JD Vance's comments.
No, this is a hypothetical. The only thing I would say is that it is coming. Will, we were talking about this right now. It is something within the MAGA base where they have been turned off from Ukraine and they look at Russia as being a potential ally, not really caring about like all the moral stuff. Again, like let's put that aside. That is the case. That is, in the stream. So again, I want to make sure you're not avoiding this question, Bill. Why wouldn't
so we talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene? If we're talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene,
we could talk about different people, but that's not even the point. The point is whether or not it works or not in this very immoral Machiavellian sense.
It's a great question. It's a great question, Lev. And so what I did yesterday, we opened a poll. Yesterday through the Institute to ask these exact questions of the American public. How do you feel about Russia now that we have this incredible partnership between Ukraine and the United States? How do you feel about Russia? How do you feel about our president's job in regards to Ukraine? So what's going to happen with these answers? We're going to figure out where does the American public lie in regards to Russia, in regards to Putin, right?
To be fair, though, that's not what I meant. I understand that people feel different ways about different things. I'm talking specifically about strategy here. Why would it not strategically work for China and Russia to be separated and for, Will, like you said, for Russia to join up with the United States? let's say some deal is offered for that to happen, why wouldn't it work? I don't know, JP, any thoughts on that? And then we're definitely going to get to Peg, who's been waiting like a saint, like Saint Joan of Arc. So
I would say, Lev, I don't want to say anything. I want to hear from Pascal, so I'll shut up. And
okay, Pascal, give
the
me
time.
the European perspective on this. Could that happen? Could Russia join up with the United States against China?
Well, first of all, thank you for comparing me to the most beautiful young virgin in the history of France. Okay, so first of all, I don't have anything very original to say. I would say that from the perspective of the Russian government, the United States is not a credible interlocutor. And so I would say that there would be a lot of skepticism from the Russian government vis-a-vis such a question. Xi Jinping is the devil, he's extremely transactional, but that's good in a way, because you know what he wants. And so that's why I don't believe in this sort of like 300 IQ, Nixon Kissinger 2.0. We're going to ally with Russia against China kind of thing. I mean, I think it would be good to not turn Russia into an enemy. I think it would be good to end the Ukraine war in a way that brings stability to the region. But the fundamental problem is that there's been, you could call it like misunderstanding or miscommunication between Russia and the US throughout the presidency of Vladimir Putin, and going back to Chechnya, going back to the war in Iraq, going back to sort of post 9/11 Afghanistan stuff, war on terror stuff. And of course, the Obama reset, which lasted for about 5 minutes, the war in Libya, where the US deliberately tricked the Russian government to voting for a UN resolution, giving assurances that resolution would not be used to do regime change in Libya, and then doing exactly that. And so my perspective is that, not just Putin personally, but like anybody with influence in Russia, anybody who's likely to be an influential voice in the Russian government in the future, is somebody who would, if Trump walks in Moscow tomorrow, let's say we have a big, beautiful deal about Ukraine, and Trump, walks into the Kremlin and says, all right, we're going to do this and this on trade and oil and this and that. And, you're going to stop selling oil to China. You're going to sell it to us, and we'll whatever. He's not going to buy it. He's not going to buy that it's going to last more than, at best, this current presidential term. So that would, in my mind, that would be like the biggest obstacle to such a plan.
JP,
But
do you agree?
I don't know.
One moment, sorry. I think, well, for one, I mean, we as we alluded to earlier, the real way, if you really want to stop Russia, you'll stop the oil money, and Europe is. I just saw even new stats today. Many European countries have given more money to Russia for oil and gas than they have in aid to Ukraine. And there's some different ways you can look at those numbers based on the valuation of equipment, but in general, that seems to be the case. Secondly, the Biden administration, Germany especially, yes, and which, by the way, in that 2019 phone call between Zelensky and Trump, which someone did not want those two guys to work together in 2019 because they were poised to work together. And go back and look at the readout of that call, and one of the things they agreed on was how Angela Merkel had been an absolute disaster for Europe and for Ukraine. But the Biden administration, for all their talk of sanctions, they gave the U.S. Treasury Department under Biden gave sanctions waivers to 10 Russian banks simply and solely because they worked on oil and gas transactions. So you could sanction Russian chocolate companies or whatever, but when it came to the heart of it, the companies that fuel the Russian war machine, they were completely allowed to sort of continue that. And so it was not serious whatsoever. And this is why I think, actually in Ukraine, I mean, when Trump was elected, I was in Kyiv the day after Election Day, and there was a lot of hope. People had been pretty depressed because they knew that with Biden, it was going to be this as long as it takes, which means we're all going to slowly bleed and die. And there was the clear hope is that with Trump, you either get a clear yes or a clear no. And we see that, Trump doesn't have a problem with say, for example, with the tariffs, with prices rising in the short run, because you can see the longer view of it. And this is exactly what would have to be done with Russia. And so I think, I think personally, I think in a personal way, Trump has seen that Russia is not a fair, is not someone you can deal with honestly. And neither is Beijing, but at least Beijing has stuff they produce beyond oil and gas. Beijing is a valuable trading partner, and Russia's not. And I think, especially with this, what I've appreciated so much about the Trump administration, whether you look at RFK Jr. and working to make America healthy, you look at Elon and his innovative ideas and cleaning up the government. We're in a mode where we want to be creating things, and Russia is destroying. And I think China also wants to be a creator and not a destroyer. And so I think actually the true alliance might is unite the creators here, not the people who only know how to destroy.
That's well said, JP. I'm a little bit skeptical on uniting the creators from China, but back to Will for a second. So, Will, when it comes to Russia being excised away from China, one concern that I personally have, if we imagine that scenario, is, well, what are we going to do about all the Siberian land that China's already de facto colonized? That is going to be a really, really big issue in terms of getting them away. And,
well, I mean, I'm not saying I want Russia to be an ally. I mean, China wasn't an ally after we had détente with, and came to the understanding. I mean, basically, U.S. and China weren't allies. We just stopped being enemies. I think that's the way to think about what happened there. So I don't, we certainly wouldn't help Russia retake its sovereign territory in
fair enough.
Siberia.
But then let's say they're not allies. They're not allies.
Not something we would help with, even in a world where we somehow had.
No, fair enough. I agree. But let's say in the scenario that we're not allies, but we're not arming the people who are fighting against Russia. In the sense, though, the expectation would be, okay, Russia, you can have this amount of territory, but you can go no further. No, you cannot take Poland. I'm so sorry. You cannot take the Baltics. In that scenario, what would stop Russia from taking Poland and taking the Baltics?
I mean, it looks something like, I don't think Russia actually wants to go much further. I mean, they've been stuck in this war and have been hemorrhaging troops and grinding drone warfare for 2 years now. So I don't think they're really stoked on the idea of trying to, fully engage NATO and have all of NATO suddenly activated. I think my suspicion about what the solution here looks like, and I don't know if Bill would consider it just, but I just think it's what the solution's going to end up being. Are basically some territorial cessions from Ukraine, and in exchange, Ukraine gets to be in NATO, right? And so then that's sort of like, okay, now there's none of this sort of like will we, won't we stuff. Like if you go any further than you went after this peace deal, then you are Article 5. And so that's what I suspect will be the end result of here anyway, because maybe there's some way. I'm not familiar with how grinding drone warfare is, but it seems really grinding. This seems very World War I trench warfare type stuff where, I go back to World War I, there was always some talk about, well, if we just did this thing, then we'll eventually be able to make this offensive strike and change the dynamic on the ground. And that never happened for 5 years. And I'm looking at Ukraine and it's like, has the front line moved in a meaningful way in 12 months? I don't even know.
Well, actually, on the front line question, sorry guys, so for example, because this gets so twisted, I think, in the way the media talks about the war, but in last August, the Russians were about to take that city of Pokrovsk in Donbass, and all the experts, all the headlines from New York Times, Economist, Institute for the Study of War, they thought that Pokrovsk was going to fall into Russian hands within 2 weeks. And the problem with the media is that no one does a follow-up, because that was August and now it's May and Pokrovsk is not fallen. And because so, what would have if Pokrovsk had fallen, then the Russians could have moved closer to the major city of Dnipro, not the small town of Pokrovsk. And so, yeah, the lines haven't changed much, but what has happened is that the underdog has held the line in an amazing way, protecting the population centers. Again, this is why I go to Kharkiv to report. I mean, I know businesses in Kharkiv. Like I was in Kharkiv one night, several missiles hit very close to me, and I went the next morning to my neighborhood coffee shop. And I assumed that it would be, destroyed or closed. The windows were gone. There was glass and debris everywhere. I step over the debris. There was a line of people going there to support the shop. The barista poured my coffee. She remembered my usual order. No mental health day. There in the ruins of the shop, still working. And Americans don't see that part of the story. But, so we say the front line's not shifting, but it's holding. And for the underdog, that's a pretty important thing, that it's holding. So because I know Elon has put it this way too. He's like, what has been gained? Well, a lot has been gained because there are cities that continue to flourish and function because of that line holding. So I think we have to consider that side of it too.
I hear that.
Let me pick up on that if I could. Let me put some numbers to it, right?
Sure.
Because JP's headed in the right direction, and I want to help Will because I appreciate you just being honest and saying, hey, I'm not sure that I have enough knowledge, so let's help, right? So let's put some numbers to what do we mean by this is a drone war, and what do we mean when we say 80% of kills are to drones, right? So if we go back 2 years when it became a drone war, it wasn't a drone war in the beginning. We go back 2 years. Russia had huge advantage. I mean, Russia had been getting drones from Iran, from all over the world for years and years and years. So they had been building this up. So they had major advantage when this started. So to JP's point, they were able to make some traction, and certainly drones were part of that. What the Ukrainians have done, though, in the past 2 years is they have invested 99% of the drones that they make right now are from Ukraine. Early on, they were coming from other parts of the world, right? So they've gotten their production up. So they're almost at even Steven in regards to how the drones are operating in the 5 kilometer. We go 5 kilometers one direction, the other from the zero line. And that's why everything is held. That's why Russia hasn't made any advancements in any time. The only advancement they have made is they sent 10,000 North Korean troops. They tried to push, and they lost half of them. Half of those men were killed quickly. Okay, so here you have this.
So I want to. Can I interrupt because I want to actually get a handle on what you're saying. So this sounds to me like drones are kind of functioning like machine guns on the World War I front, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. From the air, from the air, and it's worse than machine guns because these are once they're on you, they're going 100 kilometers an hour. You're dead. We have videos now of people just posing, and then it goes static. Mm-hmm. You can do nothing. I mean, so what you don't see now is you don't see a lot of troops anywhere because they're all underground. They're all operators. You see FPV drones and you see mid-range drones trying to find people, right? So Russia can make no progress. So if we, the world, can sort of unite and say, let's give Ukraine a little extra push in this drone arena, right? For a small amount of money. And let's also make sure we're protecting civilians. One thing Putin has done horribly over the past 6 months, he attacks every day. He sends in Shahed, missiles, cab bombs, killing civilians in the interior of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing he can do. He cannot make any progress. So if studies show that if we can get Ukraine from a drone perspective over the top, both operationally and production, beyond parity, and again, right now the kill ratio is 5-1 Russia to Ukraine because Russia continues to just throw people at it, right? Once you get above parity and you actually start pushing, envision this, and I'm not kidding. Envision 500,000 drones in the air on the front at one time. I'm not kidding. 500,000 drones in the air at one time pushing. That's real. But it's going to take that investment and that push. Once you get above parity in 3 to 6 months, we think it can take 3 to 6 months. You get that up to 10-1, 12-1, 15-1. And you also have sanctions in parallel. Putin will not last. I mean, then the 140 million people in Russia will finally say, "Oh my God, we're losing 50,000 people a month." 100,000.
I suspect Trump is probably agreeing. Honestly, I suspect Trump's probably agreeing to something like what you're describing, which is okay. You say you need 3 to 6 months. You have 3 to 6 months.
Yes.
6 months, we're going to come back, and if the lines are still where the lines are, then we're going to demand you sit. We're going to say, come to the table. Like we're right.
Yes.
Like I think that might be what you get out of this, but I mean, the funny thing is, I suspect in the same way that I don't think Trump and Zelensky then are that. Maybe Zelensky's a little farther up, but Trump and the intelligent Ukrainian perspective are not that far apart at this point. Then I don't think
that's right, Will. That's right, Will. And I think that's why I started my sort of speech earlier with I'm not concerned about Qatar and planes and nothing burgers. I'm concerned about what's happening right now today. You got Yarmak saying this is the last chance, Putin. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what's happening on May 13th. Is it the 13th? I think it's 13th. I want to talk about that because this stuff is happening so fast. And Will, again, appreciate you wanting to come up to speed. I really did.
Yeah. So okay. I guess that my final point is that if war's been going on for 2 years.
Yeah.
If you're right that somehow there's this opportunity for like a drone surge, if you will, okay, right, a drone surge that pushes the Ukrainians over parity, allows them to retake their territory. Okay, I'm sure if there's a reasonable proposal being made to Trump, he just agrees to it. Here's the plan, here's the time frame, blah 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 blah. Okay, I mean, and then fine, but also then if that doesn't work, then we're back to square one of like you guys need to make a peace deal. The lines have been frozen for 12 months.
Yeah.
Like we don't want to keep funding this. You're just killing each other for no aim.
Understood, Will.
It's either this is World War I or it's not. Right? If this is World War I, then we just need to resolve it with some sort of, as I described, like NATO accession for rump Ukraine and then Russian territorial annexation.
You're absolutely right. You got to follow the plan. You got to follow the plan that we put together, the Institute put together, and communicated to the White House and to Congress. It's pretty simple. Get a partnership in place. Okay, check that box. They did that. Arm them to the teeth. At first, it was for defensive reasons. Now it's becoming, since Putin isn't playing ball, it's becoming, we're going to let you get offensive, right? Arm them to the teeth, number 2. Number 3, sanctions. So I think everything you're saying is true about the drone position. It has to be coupled with sanctions, though. If you don't couple it with sanctions, then Putin just keeps cranking the money, and he just keeps he increases his drone position, right?
Hey, Bill, guys, if I could, quick interjection on the finances, because this is something that look, if you go to the Ukraine oversight website, it's left over from the Biden administration. I was hoping that Doge would have tackled this by now. They haven't done that yet. It's so hard to find out where the money's been going. So that's a huge problem. But if you dig a bit, if you follow me on Instagram and X, you can see some of the attempts at research I've been doing on this. But it's not $300 billion to Ukraine. It's actually, if you look at the valuation, the weapons that were sent to Ukraine, there's varying estimates, somewhere between 11 billion or 68 billion through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which it could actually be zero. That was all up to Biden to put a value on that equipment. But look at the other side. Look, a lot of the Ukraine aid is money for the Pentagon to buy new weapons for America. And no one has done a study of this. The Pentagon is always buying new weapons for America. How much of that is getting shoved into the Ukraine spending? That's what Congress does, right? They're so good at, pushing things into a package they know will be popular enough. But actually, United States has been buying, even you look at the new F-47s, how much of that money is coming from Ukraine, so-called Ukraine spending. And so actually, I think if we were to do a real analysis of it, which no one really has done yet, we might see that America is actually benefiting. For example, I think the United States gave something like 50 or so HIMARS to Ukraine. And they first arrived here, about 24 arrived in 2022. And before the HIMARS arrived in June 2022, one city in Donbass was falling every week. The HIMARS arrived, and Bakhmut was the next city due to fall, and it didn't fall for 8 months. The HIMARS turned the war around. And what happened in Poland, next to Ukraine, says, oh, wow, in case Russia invades, we need some HIMARS. And they made a deal for 486 HIMARS, after they saw the free sample of 26 that went to Ukraine. And the longer this went on for the past 3 years under Biden, is, the more Europe got scared and the more Europe agreed to buy more weapons from the U.S. And so actually, I don't, I hope the Doge would do this quite soon. But in many ways, the United States has benefited financially and not lost money at all on Ukraine.
Now, I want to make sure that we put this aside because this would be the best case scenario if we're talking about this whole plan working out. But Will, what you were talking about before, I think is very important. If it doesn't work out, where exactly are we? Because the hope for people, let's say like Chalanin here, who say that the Ukraine is, and notice he says like the Ukraine, of course he did, is an EU problem. There's absolutely no strategic value there. So if those are the people who end up winning out, the question is, okay, fine. Let's say Russia keeps going into Ukraine. Let's say it stops in this completely unguaranteed in terms of any kind of defense border, and Putin pinky swears, hey guys, this is where I stop. I'm not going to go any further. I pinky swear, I promise, with a cherry on top. And then let's say he forgoes on this promise. Maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years, you know what I mean? Like Russia gets stronger, it gets more money from China. Now they're strong enough to keep going. It doesn't matter what kind of, pinky swear they did before. In that scenario, Will, you were talking about Article 5 and you were talking about NATO. This, I think, is the big disconnect right now between people who are on the pro-Ukraine side versus people who are more skeptical. Because the idea is that, okay, fine, whatever, Ukraine, could, go to hell. We don't care about it. I'm sorry for those people, but it's, not my problem. Image of pouring the oil into the sink.
Mm-hmm.
And
so let me, Lev, if you don't mind. Lev, if you don't mind.
Also, I want to hate to interrupt and be like, but I do have to leave in like 2 minutes here.
So Will. Yes, I want to.
Before he responds, let me give him the America First why. Let me give him the America First why JP and I are saying this.
Wait, right? Bill, if you don't mind, Will's got to go. Let's hear Will.
All right.
It's important.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
All right. I mean, I forget what I was even supposed to talk about.
Article 5
right,
NATO. Article 5 NATO. My final thing to you, Will, before you respond.
Well,
I think Russia sees NATO as being a bunch of pussies, and I think that it doesn't have any faith that NATO is going to defend its own partners. So that's what would you say?
But I think they picked Ukraine. They didn't pick a NATO country to invade. I think they don't want a full bore activation of Article 5. They don't want to feel like every single country is literally going to send not just some of the military advisors, but their main armed forces to the front, or mobilize their own economies put them on a war footing. So I don't think the Russians really want that. And I think also, Russia. Everything everybody's saying about how Russia's been ground down, they're not able to advance. Like the idea that they'd suddenly, if they managed to negotiate what would be a favorable peace from their perspective, would they suddenly be like, yeah, let's go back to war, guys? I don't think that's necessarily
not true. Immediately. That's the whole point. They wait. They
in a few years now, 3 years, 4 years, rebuild the army, regenerate faster than our side does.
Maybe, but if they can do that, but I think they'd blink twice if Ukraine was actually a formal NATO member, which is why Ukraine wants to be a formal NATO member. And so I think the from American perspective, we want long-term peace in the region. That's our biggest goal. It's not necessarily beating Russia, but long-term sustainable peace is probably the primary American interest. So that probably gets unless the bill plan works. If the bill plan works, great. That's another way to get long-term sustainable peace. Russia just loses. Fine. I'm not invested. I'm not sitting here being like rah Russia. Like Russia loses, fine. That's great.
Well,
they were the invaders anyway.
Before you go, man, if you got time, I want to give you the America First why. Okay, I want to give you the America First why.
Okay, I can stick around for a couple more minutes and hear that out.
All right. Okay. So look, the America First why. Okay, so Ukraine. So right now, in some numbers. Ukraine has a military of about 900,000 men and women, 900,000. Okay, that's 4 times, not 5 times the size of the second largest army in Europe. Think about that for a second, okay? Here's the more important thing. Out of that 900,000, probably 200,000 are drone specialists. Not all drone operators, but drone specialists. Think about that. 200,000 of the 900,000 are drone specialists, okay? Here's how I'm going to flip it to you in America First why, right? I had a conversation with an unnamed congressman 2 weeks ago. I said, I want to talk to you about the power of Ukraine in regards to the drone capabilities, not only production, but the knowledge the operational efficiency. I mean, they've got drones down to $400 to $500 that we would spend $20,000 for. Think about that from an economics perspective, right? And also think about how much they've learned how to kill a man within seconds on the front. Okay, and they're doing this every day. So talk to me about the U.S.'s drone position. And he got all excited. He said, "Oh man, I've been to Hawaii. We have warehouses after warehouses of the most incredible tech." He goes, "There's something called an FP," and I was like, "FPV." He's like, "Yeah, FPVs, and we've got long range bombers, I think, but it's just beautiful. It's just football fields and football fields of drones." I'm like, "Oh, that's amazing. That's fantastic." So we've spent billions on all this tech, right? "Oh yeah, we're ready to go. Whatever they do in Taiwan or whatever they do in Ukraine, we're ready to go." I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, "That's cool." I'm like, "What are the training facilities like? Like, talk to me about that, man. I want to hear about the football fields of training. Do you have trenches built and you have caves with operators and drones going overhead? And how about 500,000 drones in the air at the same time? What does that look like?" And he stepped back and he's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "I understand training, but what do you mean?" I'm like, "What are we doing about it? Do we have, it sounds like we have a friggin' T-ball team. We've got great equipment, but we're a bunch of 6-year-olds. You got the LA Dodgers and the New York Yankees over in Eastern Europe fighting right now, and they've been fighting for 2.5 years. They've been going at it.
Yeah, I hear that.
Right? Yeah.
Somebody I saw made a joke that it was like, obviously the second strongest, at least the two strongest armies in Europe are Russia and Ukraine, and that if Ukraine got bored and decided to turn west, things would get very bad for Western Europe if that actually happened.
And you know what?
The United States.
That's what Russia wants. I mean, Russia did that with the Chechens. If Russia took over Ukraine, Ukraine would be part of the Russian force against whatever they wanted. But Bill, that's a great point in that too. And I
all right.
I encourage people to look at that. Oh, sorry, Will. Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Will.
Will, take care. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much for your commentary.
Yeah.
And guys, don't forget to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button right now, click the bell for all the people who are watching inside of the X Spaces. Make sure that you click in the Jumbotron on the YouTube link that gives you the YouTube page right here. So now, Pascal, now is your moment to shine. Finally, Will's not here anymore, and now I want to hear from the European perspective, because a lot of the stuff America could say again, like, we're Fortress America mode. Whatever happens over there doesn't bother us over here. Again, I gave the counter argument about the soft power thing that we're already kind of seeing right now from people. Also, I forgot to mention, like Tucker Carlson, for instance, as far as all of the Qatar stuff. But as far as Europe, you guys are way closer to what's going on. So if we go back not to Bill's great plan, but assume that that plan wouldn't work. If we go back to this default, starting at square one thing, where America decides, well, it's not really worth helping out. Whatever happens there happens. Do you trust that NATO is going to be able to maintain this Article 5? Or is it going to be similar to right before World War II started, where we also had all these different defense pacts all over Europe, but as soon as Hitler started going into Czechoslovakia and so on and so forth, all of them amounted to absolutely nothing? Where do you, as a European man, see all this going?
I mean, I don't speak for all of Europe. I certainly don't speak for my government. I mean, my own. I come from the Gaullist tradition in France, so they've always believed that we have always believed that if there was a big problem in Europe, the U.S. would go, "Oh, good luck, bye." So, of course, like America's not gonna start a nuclear war with Russia over Poland or Berlin or even Paris. So the whole thing is a joke. It's a way to sell American weapons. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I just think that, I mean, it's worked so far as a deterrent because the small risk that America does something, a small risk of like World War III, a small percentage multiplied by a very large number is still a very large number. right? And so a small risk of a very large cost is still a large expected cost. So in that sense, it works as a deterrent. Empirically, it has worked so far. As Will was saying, like the Russians didn't take Latvia, and they're not going to take Latvia. But all that being said, I mean, as a European, I think that my own personal opinion is that particularly my own country of France, it's the only one. It's the only country in the EU that has a real military. Needs to stop kidding ourselves about this reality, and we need to take our independence.
Independence from what?
From NATO.
Okay. So what's your position on
nuts, man? Sorry to say.
On Ukraine. Like, what's your position? I mean, I'm trying to understand your position on Ukraine, right, in this war.
I don't have a position on Ukraine.
But I kind of got that. So
Yeah.
So what's your position on Putin? You think he's a nothing burger? You think he's not? Oh, he's never going to attack Latvia or Lithuania or Poland. Well, he's no big deal.
I think that Europe is perfectly capable of deterring Putin without the U.S.
Okay.
If it wants to.
You don't know Putin, man. You don't know Putin at all. Putin is a butcher. Putin is a genocider. You seen what Putin's doing right now? He thinks he's like toying with Donald Trump, President Zelensky, and others. Putin's going to hang from a noose in 6 months.
Okay,
fair enough. But if we're talking about the realities on the ground when it comes to a possible Russian incursion, let's say to start off with Poland, okay? Poland, Article 5. Pascal, you don't really have a lot of faith in Article 5, yes?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, there we go. No faith in Article 5. Poland has to make its own way. What do you think ends up happening here? So do you expect Poland to fall? Do you expect Poland to take on all of Russia and win? At that point, when we're talking about not just Russia, but we would assume that Russia would have taken Ukraine by that point. So it would have been...
And mobilized the entire Ukrainian male population to invade Poland.
Yeah, so let's just go through this. What happens in this scenario?
Okay, which scenario is it? Is it the scenario where Russia is a gas station with nukes and all they're doing is like sending human waves and they've been losing the war continuously for 3 years even though the front line keeps advancing? Or is it and Putin is going to be dead in 3 weeks? Or is it the world where Russia is this unstoppable superpower, and if they start, they're going to be in Paris in 3 weeks? Because it's always this sort of quantum superposition where Russia is this like shithole third world country that loses everything, and also if we ever stop being at DEFCON 3, they're gonna be in Paris and London tomorrow.
I can answer this one. I can answer. Pascal, you have no idea how often the same
Sorry, I'm
conversation
getting
gets
excited.
repeated. No, it's fine. This always gets repeated, and here's my answer. If we look at World War II, I think a lot of the victory that the Russian soldiers had, the USSR soldiers had against Hitler, had to do with the American aid in the form of sending tanks, sending trucks, sending all the stuff for logistics. Meaning that's
totally irrelevant to the
No, it's not. No, it's not at all, because what you're saying,
today.
Pascal, what you're saying is that the difference between whether Russia's this big superpower that ends up getting all these, Ukrainians in to fight as well versus this shithole gas station, the difference I think does have to do with the amount of aid that's either pumped into Ukraine or that's pumped into Russia while Ukraine doesn't get any aid. So if the right side is pumped, let's say Russia is pumped sufficiently by the Chinese and by these new Ukrainian troops that they end up getting, that would make a big difference. So you're absolutely right to be skeptical, and you're absolutely right when you're talking about these people, either seeing Russia as this big giant bear that's going to destroy everything versus this, pathetic thing that can't do anything. It does go to the amount of aid that's either being given to Ukraine or that's being given to Russia. That ends up toppling the seesaw one way or another. Could we agree that that has a lot to do with it?
I mean, I agree that if the U.S. sent a lot of aid to Russia, that would help them, but I'm not sure how that's relevant.
If
So
we
look,
just have
let's just
China,
play it out.
no,
Let's
wait,
just-
hold on.
Go ahead,
I'm sorry.
all right.
Wait, no, very important. If we just have China sending aid to Russia and America not sending aid to Ukraine, if we just have that scenario, America stops all of the aid, all the funding, and leaves Ukraine by itself, and maybe some Europeans decide to pitch in a little bit, but in the end they see like,
Yeah.
okay, it's not really. And you have China that now feels way more confident and starts funding Russia even more. In that scenario, I kind of do see Russia winning. Would that not be the case, or am I not seeing something?
Well, I mean, an hour ago, I would have agreed with you, but I just learned that Ukraine has 200,000 drone specialists and that they make all their own drones. So I guess they would win.
So here's the thing. So let's say they don't. Let's say for what
I'm
Lev just played out, right?
just being ornery, but
Yeah, I know, I understand. But let's just see what Lev played out just there, right? And let's say for whatever reason the U.S. and Europe sort of teeter here over the next few weeks or months and say, yeah, we just can't help anymore. We're tired or whatever it is, right? So then you're going to have Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China. Okay, you have that four-head. Is there a fifth one? Let's just keep it that four. You got that four-headed monster right there. They take Ukraine. So like Vlad said, immediately access to 900,000 troops. Sure, some of them will leave, but most of them will be, brought in to the fold, right?
Conscription is conscription. It works.
Exactly. And then you add in not only the drone capacity and production, you add in the knowledge, the operational skills. And so right now you have 2 drone armies on the planet. Only 2. If you've got stuff in warehouses, you're not a drone army. Okay, we have the Dodgers and the Yankees in Ukraine fighting out. Those are the 2 greatest drone armies on the planet.
I understand that, and that's a very good argument for the West supporting Ukraine. It's actually a very good argument.
But I want to get to the.
I don't disagree with it.
Like they wouldn't take Poland. So then those forces combine, Poland and Germany.
So
and
you're
France,
saying that if Ukraine loses, Russia will form a coalition with China, Iran, and North Korea to invade Poland.
and everything they consume in Ukraine, which just completely
I just,
elevates
Bill,
their
I
game.
just came back from Poland. I just spent 4 days in Poland speaking with the heads of all the parties and former head of a CM, former head of a Senate. I just
Vlad,
saw.
sorry, nobody could hear you on Spaces. By the way, you have to make sure you sign in on Spaces. While you're signing on Spaces, I want to reply to Pascal because Bill, what you said is interesting, but it didn't address Pascal's question, which. Let's rewind a little bit. It has to do with whether these great Ukrainian drone operators, if they're so great, why don't they just, annihilate Russia without the help of the United States? But from what I understand, they still need actual support in terms of munitions, in terms of different things in order to, no matter how brilliant of a drone operator you are, you still need to have that support. Without which you're not really going to be able to function for that long. I just want to make sure that Pascal, that we address that particular.
American satellites.
And Russia had, by the way, Russia probably has more. Russia has more drone specialists. More.
Sure.
We're not at parity yet.
Absolutely.
We're not at parity yet, right?
Yeah. So that's why, Pascal, did that answer your question?
I guess.
Because if not. I can. Yeah.
What's the question you want me to answer?
I wanted to address your question talking about why wouldn't the Ukrainians, without American support, be able to withstand? And you were making the ornery, as you said, statement about these drone operators.
My position is that Russia is a self-interested government.
Yeah.
That Europe should deter Russia. That Russia has the GDP of Italy, that, okay, it has this drone capability, which is very strong, but Europe as a whole perfectly has the money and the resources to deter Russia in the conventional field and in the nuclear field with France. So I don't think Putin is a good guy. I also don't think that he's insane. I don't think he would start World War III. So I guess I mean I just don't buy the theory that if Ukraine falls, it's the first of a set of dominoes that ends with Russian troops in
All right.
Warsaw.
So let me help you. Let me take this down a different direction. Then I gotta go. But I want to get
JP's leaving. He has to leave.
I gotta go. I'm so sorry. I can
Okay.
still listen, but I have to run. Yeah.
All right,
JP,
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 thank you
man,
so
Bill,
much.
I'll keep listening.
Dean Key, in a
Pascal,
month, I'll see you.
Vlad,
So-
Lev, Bill, thank you guys.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
So-
Pascal, thank
Thanks.
you so much. Thank you so much for being here still, because I want to get to the bottom of this. This is a very important issue.
It is. So let me try and help. All right, I'm gonna throw this out there. Okay. About a month and a half ago, JD Vance was in Greenland, right? And I know all of you follow the American public and the world public in reactions to Greenland. Oh my God, we're annexing Greenland. We're taking over Greenland, right? So JD had a press conference in Greenland. He answered a lot of questions. But one question he answered that I paid much attention to is, I want to explain to you why exactly I'm here, like the real reason I'm here. And the real reason I'm here is because I've learned, he admitted, I've just learned recently that Russia and China have active positions in the Arctic, and they have for decades. They have for decades.
Yeah.
So we are trying to figure out what are the best ways to secure position in this part of the world so we can deter against an attack from the Arctic. And he actually described, in my opinion, he described a Shahed drone coming over Greenland, an Iranian-made or Russian-made Shahed drone, coming over Greenland. And this is below radar. So the only thing the Greenland resources can say is to the mainland, hey, something's coming. Get on the lookout, New York, Maine, Vermont. Pay attention. We now know these things can go 3,000 kilometers, so pay attention. And he said, we need these resources here in Greenland so we can send early warning detection to the mainland. So everyone sitting in New York City can turn on their phones and go, oh, we got to go to the shelter. He described that. So in my mind, someone who's been to Ukraine quite a bit and look at my phone almost on an hourly basis, right? I go, oh my God, JD Vance just leaned into Russia attacking from the Arctic and putting the US into a situation that Ukraine is experiencing right now. So I don't agree with Pascal that that's monkey business, that is far-fetched and is down the road. This could happen if the US decides 25, 50, 60, 100 billion investment right now is not worth it. And we get to that point where Russia has consumed parts of Europe and they're turning the corner in Arctic and they've got a couple ships combined with China and they're sending those Shahed drones down to the mainland. You know how much that will cost us to defend? I don't. And I'm thinking 10 trillion, maybe 12 trillion, maybe 20. A lot. So
Yes, I agree that if Russia launches a surprise attack on the American mainland, it would be very expensive. I also think that believing that it's a realistic scenario is insane. So, like, what are we talking about here? Like, is this seriously the argument? Like,
are you saying that JD Vance
send an
is insane?
Iranian drone through Greenland to nuke New York? Because why? Because he's Hitler? Because like he's going to do something that Stalin didn't do, that
I want to ask a question.
the Soviet Union never did for 50 years of the Cold War, when we're at this close to nuking each other. But like, sure, Putin's going to do it tomorrow. Why? Because he's bad.
Question.
And also he's going to hang tomorrow because he's so weak. But
All right,
also
Pascal, you got to let Bill respond. You got to let Bill respond.
Okay,
like, yes, the U.S. has missile radars in case of like, but that doesn't mean that it's that should drive foreign policy.
You said it, Pascal. You said that's insane. So you're saying the vice president of America is insane. He's the one that described it, not me. Okay, I guess your answer is yes, he's insane.
Now, we could step back a little bit from this, though, and focus more on the slower strategy. Because, Bill, what you're talking about right now is something that I don't really expect
in 3 or 5 years. It's not going to happen.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's set that aside, because I think the more important question here is whether or not Russia will take Ukraine. Pascal, you're kind of skeptical, but you can see that kind of scenario, right, Pascal, where Russia would be able to, without American aid helping the Ukrainians out, eventually,
without American aid, probably eventually.
Yeah, okay,
Russia
great. Okay, let's put a pin on that. Now, let's imagine Europe when it comes to a lot of these horrible situations going on with the migrant crisis and a lot of populist leaders rising over the period of the next couple of years. I don't know with France what that situation is going to be like. But if we're talking about people like, what's his name, Hungary, Viktor Orban, for example, people who are in league with Russia, I see a scenario where there's not going to be this powerful reaction on behalf of all of these European countries should Russia try to bite off a little bit more. Because you go back to this question of madness, right? Like, we'd have to be mad to attack this nuclear power. Maybe it'll be fine if they take a little bit of Poland here, a little bit of, a little bit of Latvia there. Okay, it's fine. At least they're not taking France.
Come on, Lev. Let's look at what's happened today. Okay, so I'm going to name names. Okay, right now, today, we have an alliance building between France, the UK, Germany, Poland. Those four men on Friday night were in Kyiv with President Zelensky. Who did they call? Who did they call more than once? President Trump. So let's add President Trump to that alliance. Okay. And let's also add a couple more people. Let's add 3 more people. Let's add Pastor Mark Burns. If you don't know him, look him up. Let's add the chief rabbi of Ukraine, who's been in the United States for the past month.
I saw him a week ago. I'm writing a profile about him being in New York.
Very, very
amazing
good.
Man.
Very
Remarkable
good. Amazing man. Met with him and Speaker Mike Johnson last week. Beautiful meeting. Okay. Let's add the last person to this alliance, the Pope. Look at the Pope's words in the past week. What did he call Russia? An imperialistic invader. Okay. You align those, what is that, 7, 8? It's 8. Let's call that the greatest 8 ever. You get that alliance together, and I'm going to answer your question. No way does Russia take Ukraine ever. They're done. That alliance comes together and positions things from a place of strength. Putin is done. They are out of Ukraine.
I agree with you, and I appreciate a lot of these good ideas. I want to make sure we stay focused here, though, on this very specific path, which is to answer Pascal's questions, which I think are very important. Because if we do have this scenario where Russia ends up going and taking a slice of Poland and a slice of, Hungary's, there for the taking. Taking a slice of Latvia, Lithuania, the question is still going to be on the minds of the European leaders. Do we strike or do we save our own skin? So, Pascal, in your opinion, what do you think a lot of these European leaders, and not even right now, I'm talking maybe in a couple of years when maybe there's more populists who are in charge and they've been, burned by a lot of these globalist types who, support Ukraine, and they're thinking, maybe Russia's not that bad of a neighbor. Like, if you have these people who are now in charge of France, of Germany, so on and so forth, and they're seeing Poland getting invaded, they're seeing Latvia getting invaded, Lithuania, if you're a betting man, what are the chances you think that they're going to say, okay, time to assemble the troops, time to call an Article 5? Because all the other things we could talk about till the cows come home, it doesn't matter. This is the most important thing. Right. Are they going to act or not? So, Pascal, let me know as a Frenchman, what do you think?
Okay, so just to clarify, I agree that if Russia takes Ukraine and Europe/NATO, depending on which scenario, and or NATO, does nothing to deter Russia on both the conventional and the nuclear fronts, then yes, Russia will absolutely start trying to bite off pieces of the Baltics and Poland. And I agree that would be bad. But my point is that Europe could deter Russia if it wants to. And that would require, spending less money on social services and more money on the military, which is, in a democracy, it's complicated. We're sort of getting there. That just to clarify that point. in terms of what is going to happen, in terms of like predicting the future, I don't know. I mean, this is why I appreciated so much J.D. Vance's Munich speech, because he sort of put Europe in front of its contradictions, which is Europe has, believed in the mirage of the end of history for 20 years, since the end of the Cold War. And now Europe has to decide whether it wants to be a grown-up country or whether it wants to be a colony. Macron had this great line after either Trump's election or the Munich speech. He said, we have been herbivores and we have to learn to be carnivores again. And so Europe has to decide whether it wants to get its act together or not. And Europe has to decide whether it wants to be a herbivore or carnivore.
100% correct. This is absolutely correct, sir.
Yeah. And so if we don't, like, I agree with you. Like, if we just, pretend, like, I mean, again, like, I don't think that Putin is a philanthropist. Like, he respects strength. And if the Europeans just sort of like keep pretending that, we all live in sort of happy cartoon world where, we send tweets and press releases about human rights, he's going to eat us alive. Of course. Why wouldn't he? So I'm not like your answer. The answer to your question, what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3, 5 years, and if we get sort of more sort of national conservative / populist type governments in Europe, I mean, I hope that, again, I'm for European independence. I hope that Europe becomes like a real power and a real serious actor on the world stage. And I can't guarantee, right? I'm not going to place bets on whether that's going to happen. Like, sadly, the alternative scenario is very possible. So I'm kind of
problem. Yeah, I got to go too, Lev, so I want to get my last words in. But when you're ready,
yeah.
Oh, okay, Bill, go for it, and then I'll respond.
So I think. Look. I like to be present. Okay, I like to be present. And again, it's May 13th, 2025. And so let's be present here for a moment before I leave. I'm concerned about the next, let's say, 0 to 6 months, right? And here's what I see for the next 0 to 6 months to avoid everything above 2 to 5 years out or 3 to 5 years out, right? So in present day form, that alliance I described, they're all in. The U.S. has been shipping like crazy the past week. Okay, we sent a package of F-16 parts and training modules, $310 million worth, 2 days after the partnership was signed. Okay, Germany has announced we're going to ship. I'm not going to tell you what we're shipping. We know part of that package was 120 HIMARS and 100 Patriot missiles, right? Which Ukraine has been starving for, Patriot missiles, right? So it's happening. So I don't think France, the UK, Germany, Poland, and the US are still sitting back going, yeah, we're not sure. No, they're going all in. They're saying to Putin, you better come to the table, man. You better come to the table, or we're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing because we're done with you, right? So I think that for me, I'm going to keep leaning into that. I'm going to keep trying to guide the White House, guide Congress, because I think we can win this war and create an unbelievable partnership between Ukraine and the United States that is going to help us unify with Europe. Obviously, we have some issues with Europe, and so we need to fix those, right? So I'll leave you with that. I really appreciate your time, and you guys have been great.
Bill, thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, Lev, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cole.
Yeah, see
You're
you guys.
doing God's own work. I'd love to meet with you when I'm in DC. You're in DC, right?
Got it, Vlad. You got it. Take care.
I will find you, and let's keep talking. Thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Take care. Take care.
Thank you. And guys, once again, don't forget to subscribe, like, sneed those super chats. And now the two Parisians remain here. You guys are probably physically close to each other. Like after the stream, I'm curious.
I'm in the west of Paris. And just to clarify something, if I had been president of France in 2022 and since then, I would have supported Ukraine fully, and I would have done a lot more, and we would have been doing a lot more since. For a whole bunch of reasons, including the reasons Bill talked about with regard to expertise, and also because basically, if you're France, you have to choose whether to be allied with Russia or allied with Poland, and you can't be both. And so I think it's more in the French interest to be allied with Poland than to be allied with Russia. So I'm not anti-Ukraine at all. I just wanted to put that out there. So now I've made everybody mad.
No, it's okay. Look, first of all, you're Gaullist, and it's okay to talk to people who don't agree with you. Again, I was in. I didn't get to say this because when there's six guys, it's hard to talk, and everyone's interrupting each other. I spent a week talking to Polish senators a month ago, and while I was there, the head of a Polish Senate and the former head of a Polish Senate were cobbling together a nuclear umbrella deal with the French. They want French nuclear warheads on Polish territory. Yeah, and that was a secret, and I was there, but it's not a secret anymore. The Poles are absolutely terrified, and the conversations that they were having was, are we going to go all in on a European army? Do we go all in on NATO, or do we make the Polish army such a prickly porcupine that the Russians never invade? I mean, you know how many Polish senators, peace guys, center-right guys, conservatives, right-wing guys told me, I don't trust anyone except the Polish army. No Frenchman or German will ever command the Polish army. You know, I had three members, high-level members of the Polish Senate tell me they don't trust a German general to defend anything west of a Vistula. Anything east of a Vistula.
Well, with Germans, they're right, and you know,
yeah, right. Maybe they're not stupid. By the way, if I was a Polish senator, I would think the same thing. One of the guys I was talking to was his town was on the Ukrainian border. He says, "I'm from Przemysl. No one's going to defend me. Like at the very best, they'll trade territory for time. They'll defend maybe Warsaw, maybe." And so, if you're representing a part of Poland on the Ukrainian border, you're absolutely not wrong. You need either NATO or a Polish army, and that's just where we are.
So if this is the situation right now, and we could see again like how grave this has the potentiality of being if Ukraine is not supported, why don't, because you are far more within the right sphere of X, why don't people who are in the right sphere, not because they're Dems, not because they're shit libs, but because they don't want what is already in a fragile state, Europe with the migrants and all of that, I don't think they would want those areas to become areas that are full of, bombs and warfare, with these Russians and conscripted Ukrainians and God knows who else, Polish, going in there and just creating this big mess. Unless they're accelerationists, which I don't think a lot of them are. So I'm really trying to figure out here what is missing, because I think that we've made, at least you could tell me if not, a pretty good argument for why this is like a very dangerous situation if Russia is allowed to continue. So if we could already foresee that, why not just skip all these extra steps and say, okay, let's go fully on board with Ukraine. I'm tired of owning the libs all the time. It's not about owning the libs anymore. It's actually about something more serious.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem with sort of current democratic societies that people base their foreign policy views on whether the leader of country X reminds them of their political enemies or not. And I don't have a good answer for that. The views of the French right are very different from the views of the American right on Ukraine. I'm not sure exactly why. Probably because Ukraine's closer, and so it seems more of a threat. Russia, I mean, seems more of a threat. I mean, I just refuse to see this issue as a kind of like apocalyptic battle between good and evil. I think that there should be a realistic assessment of what's achievable and how to achieve some kind of peace. And I know that's not, a sexy thing to say, but what could be achieved concretely with X or Y or Z amount of aid and hardware and so on and so forth. Bill's scheme of like 500,000 drones, and we're all, we'll be having lunch in Moscow. I know he didn't say that, but
it reminds me a little
I
bit
don't
of
know,
Iraq,
man.
maybe. I don't know. It reminds me a little bit more. Not that I'm saying that he is a neoconservative, but the energy there, at least what I felt in the comment section, the energy for any kind of plan that talks about rah, 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 we're going to drop the bombs, all of that, it gives people PTSD for what happened with
that's
Iraq.
definitely part of it in the U.S.
Yeah.
That's definitely part of it. And
I just don't know if we have a choice, dude. Like, this is the problem, that if there was some way of maybe showing you 150% that Putin's not going to be able to make any kind of peace deal, that is just not going to work. The peace deals he's offered before, if we're talking about in Turkey, that was, and I already talked about this ad nauseum on the show, that was a peace deal that Arestovich, who was working with Zelensky at the time, he, on a Russian program, said, Russian-speaking program, anti-Putin program, said that he fell out of his chair laughing at the ridiculousness of that deal, because that deal involved a complete dismembering of the entire armed forces of Ukraine.
They demanded
Yeah.
disarmament.
Yeah, so if we have examples of that saying, okay, if we want to make a peace deal with these people, what are the peace deals that they're offering? If it's that, and if it keeps being more of that, and then when you add in all the things the Russian generals say about taking the rest of Europe, all the stuff that's on Russian TV talking about going beyond Ukraine, which some people may say, well, that's propaganda for the plebs. It's not. Russian television is for Putin. It's for Putin to watch. It's become like this Ouroboros, snake eating its own tail. Putin watches Russian TV and gets inspired by it. But anyway, the point being is that if there was some way beyond what I already said to show you, and maybe to show, I don't know, raw nationalists and maybe other people who are more in the right sphere, that this isn't going to happen, we're not going to have any peace with this guy, then the ancient idea of the strong and resolute leader who has to, make their decision after getting all the information and stand by that decision, that would be more of like a archetype that I think a lot of based and traditional people would admire. Somebody who gets the information, says, okay, I know what exactly to expect now. Now we have to act decisively, as opposed to being in this dumb, ironic meme-centered existence where it feels like so much of it is audience capture, so much of it is just doing the things that the people who follow want to hear from you. It is poison, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like, it's the opposite of this like resolute leader who sees everything and then makes the decision. And it's like, how do we get to that? But also, what else do you need from, let's say, me and Vlad or whoever else in order to show that this deal is just not going to happen?
I mean, I kind of agree with you that the deal is not going to happen if we're talking about like the what Trump is working on right now, simply because the war's going better for Russia right now, and so they don't have an incentive to stop.
Economic incentives. The only way they're going to stop is economic incentives. The system will collapse eventually. They need to play at that.
I see no evidence of that. I don't know. I mean, this is the problem, right? Which is that one thing that I do believe is that Russia has legitimate security interests in the region. And so there needs to be some way to give Ukraine security guarantees in a future peace deal that doesn't involve NATO. And so it's kind of a square circle, and I don't see a very good, there would have to be some sort of third party, some sort of body I mean, you know, Chirac had a plan. Chirac had a plan in the. Sorry, for some reason my music player started playing, so I started.
No problem.
Chirac had a plan in the 2000s where Ukrainian neutrality and security would be guaranteed by the NATO-Russia Council, which was a thing that existed at the time. It was a plan that the Russians supported and that the U.S. Rejected because they wanted Ukraine in NATO.
From a
Yeah,
French
I don't know.
friend, by the way, from a French-speaking friend in Canada here, Golin Didier, he writes, Russia doesn't need security guarantees. NATO would never invade Russia. It's a bullshit POV. So
Yeah,
I know.
obviously.
No, but Vlad, say like why? Like why wouldn't that work?
Well, first of all, I mean, why would to what end would NATO ever invade Russia? I mean, I believe some people in Russia have convinced themselves that is the case, but this war against Ukraine, this terrifically terrible, disgusting genocidal war, has actually added new powers to NATO, and it's actually beefed up NATO spending and cohesion, coherence, capacity, all of it. Before this, the the European and NATO armies had disarmed. I mean, it's true that NATO is closer to the Russian border, but there's 90% less capacity in tanks than there were in 1985 or 1992, right? So the only thing that matters is tripwires for nuclear weapons, right? Deterrence is on both sides through nuclear arms for the same reasons that that the Russians have not attacked Europe properly. Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania. The Americans and the Europeans have not actually themselves used weapons or shot into Russia, right? The nuclear tripwire guarantees all of that. So I don't. I don't believe that Russia has any kind of security guarantees that weren't being taken care of. Russia's an expansionist state that controls like a seventh of the world's territory, 11 time zones long. That the NATO border is on like 6 or 7% of its territory. Shouldn't hurt anybody. I don't believe that the Georgians or the Ukrainians being in NATO would have hurt anybody. It just would have prevented the Russians from meddling inside Georgian and Moldovan and Ukrainian politics and from dominating them through military or political or economic means.
Pascal, any thoughts?
I disagree.
What do you base your disagreement on? Where is the
If
issue?
If Belgium joined a military security alliance with China, France would invade Belgium like that. And for reasons that are perfectly obvious to any person who thinks about it for 5 seconds. So, I mean, like this is the reality of geopolitics. There are spheres of influence, and you don't want an immediate neighbor to be allied in a military security sense with a geopolitical rival and adversary. I mean, it's just that's just the reality of the world we live in, and
Mansour, has China ever occupied Belgium? Because Russia has for many, many, many centuries occupied Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine. I mean, like the Cold War, the post-Cold War period of 1991 to let's say 2012-14 was an interregnum in which the Russians were just too weak to do what they've been doing traditionally since the 1750s, right? Since the 1700s, they just go on a warpath and a rampage. Ukraine will never have any kind of peace with Russia as its neighbor until the Russians do what the kids call work on themselves: psychoanalysis, decommunization, denationalization, all the things that we made the Japanese and the Germans do in order to change their elites' minds and change their culture and to make them peaceful. after World War II, you would need to do that or have the Russians do that to themselves. Like you can either put a man in prison and make him not a danger to the society, or he can go to a psychiatrist and say, look, I really need to change and deal with my deep-seated issues. And that works. But the Russian population or the Russian government, the Russian society has not done the work, which is a terrible line that the kids say. And just Russians are imperialists. It's what they do. Why would they? Why would the Ukrainians?
Everybody's an imperialist.
Well,
to which extent?
Not
though,
everyone
that's
has nuclear weapons and 150 million population, and I mean, like, are the Canadians imperialists? No. Are like the
Quebecois would say yes.
Okay, I like the Quebecois. I like it.
I still think there's a difference between the Quebecois.
Lots of people would call the
Russians.
French imperialists because yes, we were for 1,000 years.
Sure.
Well, we all have these social contracts, and it's never this clear black and white thing. Obviously, certain countries still have certain imperialistic ambitions, but that's like saying that men on Wall Street are perverts. You know, it's not whether you're a pervert, it's whether you act on your perversion. Whether you go to Epstein's Island or whether you just, have like your fantasies in your head.
Some guys in Wall Street are family men and go home at night and engage in lives of empty consumption instead of flying to Epstein's Island, right? And
I mean, to the point that you were talking about, Pascal, related to, well, why should Russia, trust the West, where it sees like all of these countries now being part of NATO? Russia has been seen by a lot of these countries as being kind of like what Vlad was talking about, this wild hog, this undomesticated animal that has no problem, doing the kind of things that it did in Chechnya, has no problem going into Georgia, into southern Ossetia. So even now, even like modern Russia, not even talking about the USSR, but like modern Russia, they've already seen these steps that it's taken. And as far as whether Russia has anything to fear from the United States or from NATO invading it, I'm not seeing that as much as I'm seeing a lot of justifications for the people who observe Russia to see it, being the scorpion on top of the frog. You know what I mean? Like they see the nature of Russia, and I think you, Pascal, also see the nature of Russia. So
I think he does. I think Pascal.
Yeah.
I think I'm wagering on Pascal seeing the nature of Russia. I have to say, I think I'd win that wager because I'm listening to him talk. He's not an idiot. He's an intelligent man. I just don't agree with him. By the way, gents, we should wrap this up in about 5 minutes. But I'd like to hear what he has to say.
Yeah. Well, you guys are close now. You're in the same area, so while you're here. Maybe
I disagree that there's this like evil Russian nature. I think Russia is one of the great nations and civilizations of the world that has given so much great literature and music and ballet and
by the way, sorry to interrupt, but all those literature people like Pushkin's dream was to go to Paris. The Tsar didn't let him because he knew that once that guy's in Paris, he ain't coming back. So you're right, Pascal, but it was this very specific...
And where was he born?
He was born in Russia. He was the son of the slave kid that was given to Peter the Great.
That was a great grandson, Hannibal.
Yes, thank you, great grandson. Yeah. But the point being here is that, of course, think of the ship of philosophers that Lenin sent away during the Soviet Union, who were disagreeing.
Yeah, I agree. Communism is bad, but Russia
is it's not just communism, man. The kind of communism that we had in the Soviet Union was deeply ingrained. And I mean, I was born in the Soviet Union, and I had a Russian passport, which I burned. And I read Russian literature in college, and I grew up speaking Russian. I'm from a Russian-speaking family, and I grew up in the Russian-speaking diaspora. Like Russia, at the margins, at the tail ends, produces remarkable ballerinas and art and paintings and constructivism and all that. Like 90% of Russia's terrible, disgusting serf, peasant, like Tatar yoke grotesqueness that they need 1,000 years of evolution to get rid of. I'm sorry. Like I studied Russian literature in college, and I am in my head, I think like a Russian, and I burned my Russian passport. And 90% of Russian population are like completely primitive and need to be deprogrammed, and like we did to the Germans and the Japanese.
Think of it this way, Pascal. They're like the migrants. They're like the migrants in Paris.
Russian culture is rape and destruction of people in Bucha. It's Russian men who did this, right? Even though a lot of ethnicities. I mean, you have to understand, Dostoevsky is Russia, in the sense that Russia is deeply fucked up, right, and deeply rotten to the core.
I mean, you did I spent at various points of my life a fair amount of time in Russia and a fair amount of time in Ukraine, and they're both wonderful country with wonderful people. And I have to say that what you just did was like a perfect example of everything that my Russian friends have been saying about Ukrainians, which is that it's become this kind of fanatical cult that is almost jihadi in its sort of like level of, like, I'm sorry, of derangement. Like what you just said is just insane in its level of like bloodthirst and sort of, just total contempt for an entire nation with a 500-year history. Like, I would never speak that way about Germany and Germans. I would never speak that way about Italy and Italians. I would never speak that way about the English.
As a Russian grandmother, it's a completely rotten civilization. As someone with 3 Jewish grandparents and a Russian grandmother.
Okay. I mean, you're obviously entitled to that belief, but insofar as that belief motivates your views on foreign policy, I'm not going to think that your views on foreign policy are serious. I'm sorry. And
I mean,
I say that with great sympathy, but
fine.
Wait, Pascal, where in Russia were you staying?
I've been to Moscow, I've been to St. Petersburg, I've been to Sochi, I've been to Kiev, I've been to Odessa.
Well, that's Ukraine. And that's Ukraine too. Okay, so the countries that you mentioned, not countries, the places you mentioned right now.
I've been to Kiev when it was Russia, and I've been to Kiev when it was
fair
Ukraine.
Enough. No, that's not my point. Pascal, you were in the crown jewels of the Russian Federation. You were in the places that get most of the tax money. You were not in the backwoods, my friend. You were not in the places where the kind of people who are equivalent to the migrants that are crossing over into Europe are. And that's the big difference. That's the disconnect. Of course, Pascal, if you're talking...
I would say they're much worse than any...
Okay, fair enough. But if you're talking with people who, even if they're not morally, agreeable with me and Vlad, they're still people who were educated. They're still people who probably came from, especially people who would interact with leaders or thought leaders.
Russians are very francophile, so I'm sure they put their best face on for me.
Of course.
Okay, but when you say they, it's specific people.
Don't
it's not
believe
like...
that any people is, I would never talk about any people in the way that you talked about,
including the migrants.
Like, listen to yourself.
Wait, including the migrants.
As a Russian
migrants is not a nation.
But migrants are not a nation. As a Russian man, I've seen the Russians do horrific things to their own troops in this war that Ukrainian troops just do not do to their own guys. The way that the Russian commanders treat their own troops in the most brutal, vicious way. I can send you some clips, but Ukrainian side just does
I
not
can send you some clips too. Like, I mean, both sides share these horrible clips that I refuse to watch, and I also refuse to play the game of like, who killed more civilians or who kidnapped more.
Everyone kills civilians in war. What is barbarism, man? Like, which is barbarism something that a certain amount of your people do against your own side's rules, or is it something that is intrinsic to the way your side does war? And so, like, as someone with ethnic Russian blood, who has a degree in Russian literature, who inherited a Russian passport from my father, I just think, like, some amount of the population of the Russian Federation is embroiled in primitive barbarism, right? And my people, the intelligentsia, and my teachers of Russian Komplet and Sakharov's grandson, and all these nice Russian intelligentsia diaspora people that I grew up with, they're a minority. The majority of the Russian population were serfs 200 years ago.
The majority of every population were serfs. If you go back far enough.
Not to the extent of how they were treated.
Their own people.
This
No.
is the other difference. Where we're talking about like French serfs, French
I'm
peasants.
I'm arguing against two Russians about whether the Russians are like this
Exactly.
inferior
No,
people
but
who need
here's
to
the
be
thing.
like.
It's not a question of inferiority. It's the
Not
question
inferiority,
of
it's bad
collective.
culture. It's bad
It's the
culture.
it's the collective PTSD that these poor people, and yeah, they are poor people. Like Vlad,
Right.
whatever Vlad says about them, at the end of the day, they're people who got really, really fucked up by the Mongols.
By
who-
history.
Yeah, by history, by the Mongols, by Peter the Great,
Yeah.
by these czars, and it really
Bad
sucks
weather, bad
because
food will leave you really unpleasant.
these are not the nice French peasants, who like make the brie cheese.
Yeah,
These
you have
are
better food. You have better weather. You
Yeah.
have better.
So
everything.
okay, so
You
so the
enslave
only
your own
thing
people,
before we
enslave other
go, Pascal, the only thing that I would beg for you to please consider is that
Yeah.
the people who you hung out with in these crown jewels of the Russian Federation, as well as in Kiev and other places like that, these are people who do not come from this
That's
very
that's fine, but
PTSD-ridden situation. These are, they're different people. That's the problem. You didn't really experience it.
Like there's
I mean-
a terribleness to a lot of a culture, just as the small amount of a liberal democratic intelligentsia in Berlin and Tel Aviv and New York and some of them in Paris are very, very, very charming and very nice and lovely. They're like a small minority of the population.
yeah,
The
I'm not a
majority
fan
are-
of liberal intelligentsias anywhere.
Sure. Yeah, but
I don't know what to say. I have great sympathy for you as somebody whose country is at war, but I would really urge you to listen to the way that you talk about another
grew up in the Russian diaspora. I have a degree in Russian
not just
literature,
another
man.
nation's government and policies, but like about its people as a whole.
How do people talk about the Somalians
and
in the
just
United
be
States?
aware of how I would never talk about the Somalis like that. Like I
I
will
would never
happily
talk
say
about
that
Somalis
Somali
either.
culture is
I'd be
incompatible with
racist
Western
and-
culture, and that if somebody ships 1 million Somalis to my front door, I think that they should be politely but firmly sent back home. I will not say
Yeah,
that Somalis
I have no problem with that. But I
this
also don't know anything
subhuman
about Somali
whatever
culture,
that has intrinsically for the past 500 years only ever done barbarism.
Not only
Like,
ever.
I'm sorry,
but,
like
there's a lot
it's
of
just
barbarism, man.
even if you're right, it sounds deranged to a normal person. Like I'm just telling you, this is a fact.
Yeah,
So
I get it, man. Like it's 11:20. All the other guests have gone. As a guy whose name is Vladislav, I think the Russian civilization has intrinsically deeply screwed up social cultures and psychological structures, which need it's not a racial thing, it's a cultural thing. I'm chauvinist against my own culture. I understand my own culture
Yeah.
so well that I despise it. There you go.
Well, yeah. Well, and I will say that that's a very unpleasant thing to watch.
Look, as you say, a guy named Lev and a guy named Vladislav are telling a guy named Pascal that Russia has really deep fucking problems.
Yeah. Well, okay. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Last thing then. This is a question of how do you go about this? Like, would you want things to be better for the Russian people? I would want that. I think Vlad would want that as well. But it is a question of
Yes.
addressing the elephant in the room. What is this Russian culture that's been responsible for all of these, the rapes and all these horrible things just think of the Germans after World War II, the kind of culture that they were encountering with a lot of these Russian troops. It was not a pleasant one at all. And that doesn't just maybe I'm wrong here, I wouldn't imagine French troops being as barbaric as the Russian troops during World War II have been to their own people. I'll give you this example. My great uncle, he was in what's called a Strabat, which is a penal colony unit, meaning he was sentenced by Joseph Stalin to be in the gulags. And then when World War II started, he was in the front lines there. Guns were pointed at his back by his fellow Russian troops.
Yes.
And he was to march in this penal colony unit. And, you got the rest.
Yes, Stalin's
Yeah.
regime was horrible.
But it's not just Stalin, though, dude. It's like
Also,
the whole
Stalin
thing.
wasn't even Russian.
He was Georgian, fair enough. But it's the whole thing, man. It's not going to. Pascal, it doesn't function just with having like one bad egg like Stalin. You need to have this collective PTSD of all of these people who agree that yes, it's fine to live in a society where any moment a car is going to, go next to your apartment and pick you up and send you to the gulags. And you praise Stalin. Like so many of these Russian people, dude, they praise Stalin even after they were released from the gulag. That's how much they loved him, and that's really fucked up mentality. I wish there was some way to convey to you what that is. And I'm not saying it because I don't want the Russian people to exist or anything like that. I want the Russian people to be better than in the state they're currently in. I don't know, just if you think that there may be a shred of truth to what I'm saying, what do you need to see in order to see that being the case? And Vlad, you're muted right now, buddy.
I'll let the gentleman answer, but would you have to see the Russian blocking battalions that shoot their own guys in the back when they retreat yourself, or see the Chechens who are told to shoot these Russian guys, or to understand the political culture, or watch the cages where Russians put their own guys to sit there without water or food for 5 days for infractions of military thing? Like, the Ukrainians just have different culture. They just don't do that. I'm sorry for the chauvinism. I thought I was talking to a right winger who allowed me to be a little bit chauvinist, right? Just Ukrainians. I'm sorry. I thought you were a right winger. I thought I could be open about my chauvinism. I'm sorry. So it's 11:30 at night. Some things are coming out, right?
No,
I've been to the front lines. Our guys don't do that. We just don't do that. We don't send our own guys to be into the meat grinder. We just do not have the same culture.
Okay.
Pascal, go to Ukraine with Vlad. After the show, meet up. Meet up in Paris.
Would I be allowed back in my own country? That's the question.
Of course you would. Why wouldn't you?
Why not? It's a democratic country.
Know.
I will arrange with you. Yeah, whatever. With 6 presidents and 6 elections.
And by the way, when you're in a state of this is one of the dumbest criticisms of Ukraine and Zelensky. Like, when you're in an existential war, of course you have to suspend some liberties and so on and so forth. Churchill did the same thing. The FDR did the same thing. I get it.
Yeah. But even then, just because
it's not really a democracy. Let's be honest.
Just because Vlad tells you something doesn't mean you should believe it, right? Like, Vlad tells you these things about the difference between the Ukrainian troops and the Russian troops. That's the only way, right? Like, what else is there? So that's the choice. Either we don't believe anything as far as these things about the Russians versus about the Ukrainians.
I take for granted that sides in all wars commit atrocities to some extent, and I agree that some are worse than others. I'm not trying to portray a moral equivalency, Dresden was not as bad as the Holocaust or whatever, but that's not my point. My point, we were having a conversation about Russia and Ukraine and the future and how the West should deal with Russia, and you started going into this tangent about the fundamental evil and rapaciousness of the Russian people as a whole.
They had problems.
I pointed out, that sounds insane to any normal person who hears it. I'm sorry, even if it's true, it's just that, okay? And number 2, I don't consider this to be a rational basis for foreign policy. And so that's,
if it's true,
knowing which soldiers commit more atrocities where is I mean, it's not completely irrelevant, but it's sort of irrelevant. That's not the. I was reacting to that. So I think that in general, not always, but in general, states and governments and nations are rational actors. They act on the basis of a calculation of cost and benefit. Again, not always, not perfectly. They're not robots, but in general, that's the basis on which you should think about these foreign policy questions. And so in the case of a country of Russia, you should not think of them as this evil monster. You should think of them as a rational actor who, yes, will eat you if you're weak, but also can be deterred if the nations of the West, in particular Europe, sort of get their shit together when it comes to military and so on,
Pascal, it's
and
a mixture.
interests and
Pascal,
so on and so forth.
It's a
That's
mixture.
what I believe. Like,
It's
I get that you
rationality
disagree,
plus
but that's my
insanity.
position. I'm explaining my position, and I think
Please.
it's pretty rational.
Look. I have to tell you, the Russians, just like the Ayatollahs in Tehran, and I've spent a lot of time in Tehran, are rational, extremely cold and calculating, cost-benefit calculators. They're very, very highly intelligent, shrewd, cunning, vicious people, but they're operating on an ideology which is a fundamentally fanatical, psychotic one. Putin is an extremely rational calculator of risk, and he's risk averse actually in many ways. But
Yes.
he is like a messianic madman calculating rationally about how to get tactically to completely crazy strategic goals. Does that make sense to you?
I understand that it makes sense the way you describe it. I just don't think it describes Vladimir Putin as he exists in reality.
Okay. All right. Well, we disagree, man. Gents, it's really getting late in Paris. I hope to see you one day. I hope to see you. Lev, thank you for bringing us all together. It's been
Thank you
it's been
guys
a
so
wild
much for
ride.
coming in. There is a lot
It's
more
been
to talk
interesting.
about there later on. There is things that we disagree on right now. It's all a matter of how do we get to the truth? How do we actually
so
find
much.
out for sure whether or not Vlad is right, whether Pascal, you're right. But we're going to keep doing it with BTR. Once again, everybody, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and write a comment, send it to all your
we were
friends.
all right wingers here. I thought I could be chauvinist at 11:30 or midnight. I'm sorry. Had a couple of drinks. I just thought I could let it all out.
It turns out I'm just a lib. I'm just.
I thought you were like. I thought I was talking to a proper right winger, and turns out you're a shit lib to make me
Yes,
embarrassed. For my
I'm a total
words.
shit lib.
All right, guys.
hope
Have
to
a
buy
good
you
night,
drinks, sir. Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. You're
Bye-bye.
very
Here
gracious.
Go.